What is going on, guys? Gaston right here, where we learn more and take our craft further. And in today's video, we're going to be reviewing 3 of my favorite portrait lenses that I own. 2 of these lenses are from Sony. 1 of them is from actually Sigma. So we're talking about the 85mm f1.4 G Master from Sony, the 105mm f1.4 R series from Sigma, and the 135mm f1.8 G Master from Sony. Now, 3 lenses that are incredible, and I've been using these lenses since I got them. So let's start with the 85mm f1.4 G Master from Sony. So this is a lens that I got when I first made the full transition from Canon to Sony. Before, I used to convert my Canon lenses into Sony with an adapter, and this one was the first lens that I decided to get as my native Sony lens. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I got this lens was the focusing performance, and that was one of the reasons why I stopped converting lenses from Canon into Sony. However, when I got this lens, my focusing performance wasn't that great or that much improved. So the 85mm, it is going to be the slowest lens at focusing. And even though right now there is a new firmware update that I've done to the lens that actually improves that a little bit, it's still not the fastest lens out there. Nonetheless, the image rendition that comes out of this lens is incredible. So let's talk a little bit about some of the features of this lens. So as you can see, this lens features an aperture ring that goes from f1.4 to f16. It also features a click and declick option, for you video shooters that love to move the aperture dynamically. You got that switch right there. Also, we have a customizable button right there that you can customize to hold focus or whatever you want to do there. And also we have an autofocus and manual focus switch. Now, what you guys see right here is what I do to every single lens that has an aperture ring. I actually lock it with a piece of tape, set the lens on the A, and that allows me to control the aperture with my front dial from the camera. So now let's talk about the price of this lens. This lens is going to set you back at $1,800. So it is not the most expensive lens that we're going to be reviewing, but also is not the cheapest lens. Now, the weight of this lens is 1 pound and 8 ounces, which it equals at about 120 grams. So it is the lightest lens out of these 3 lenses that we're going to be reviewing today. Now, let's talk about the construction of this lens. The lens is going to feature a plasticky construction from the lens mount up to the filter thread. Now, the filter thread seems to be out of aluminum, and the focusing ring is actually rubberized as most G Master lenses. Now, next up is the 105 f1.4 from Sigma. This has become one of my favorite lenses. Now, this lens, it is incredibly heavy. It weighs 3 pounds, 6 ounces, which it equals at about 1.5 kilograms. So this lens is actually twice the weight of the 85mm. So it's a heavy lens. Now, let's talk about the features that we can see at a glance around the lens. It has an autofocus and manual focus switch right there. It has a distance indicator right there, which I don't get to use much, and it features a focusing ring that is really, really smooth. Now, the construction of this lens is made out of aluminum from the mount of the lens through the filter thread, and it feels a little bit more premium than the G Master lens. Now, the price of this lens is about $1,500. It is the cheapest lens that we're gonna be reviewing today, but nonetheless, incredible construction on the lens and incredible image quality. Now, this lens features a tripod mount because of its weight. Of course, you don't wanna allow this lens to hang too long from the mount of your camera because it's really, really, really heavy. So next up is the 135mm f1.8 from Sony G Master. Now, this is Sony's latest lens. It is a lens that is also incredible. It renders an incredible amount of detail. The focusing performance of this lens is incredible. And the weight of this lens is actually very similar to the 85mm. This one is about 2 pounds. The 85 is 1 pound, 8 ounces. So that equals to 950 grams. So this lens is very easy to handle. Again, it's a little bit heavier, tiny bit heavier than the 85, but nonetheless very maneuverable. Now, when comparing both lenses against the 105, you're going to realize that these 2 lenses, the 85 and the 135, are going to be the lightest out of the 3 lenses. Now, like I mentioned before, the construction of the G Master lenses, they seem to be about the same. It features the same plasticky construction from the mount of the lens up to the filter thread, where we find some sort of aluminum right here. The focusing ring is also rubberized, and it also features an aperture ring that I have done exactly the same thing and locked it with the piece of tape right there. Now, this aperture goes from f1.8 to f22. Now remember, by locking the aperture on the A, it allows you to control the aperture with the front dial of your camera. Now, right over here, we also have a customizable button and another one over here. It also features an autofocus and manual focus switch and a focus limiter switch right there. Now, I want to tell you guys where I like to use these lenses more and in which situations. The 85mm f1.4 G Master from Sony is a lens that is going to allow you to work in much more confined spaces, like a home studio, like a garage studio, or smaller location or places like that. This lens is going to allow you to move back and forward with your subject and getting all the shots that you need, especially if you're going to be shooting portrait and then you're going to move up to a little bit of hot body and stuff like that. So this lens is going to allow you to do that in much confined spaces. The 105mm that I have right here is a lens that actually sits in the middle of the 85 and the 135, and I think is one of the reasons why I get to use this lens the most. Now, it is a lens that is going to allow you to use it at the studio with no problem, medium to large size studios. It is a lens that is going to be awesome for the outdoor with a f1.4 aperture and with the 85mm. It renders incredible amount of bokeh if you are into that effect. You know, it's really smooth, the bokeh, and it's also the same with the 85mm. Now, this lens, yes, it is heavy, but to me, that hasn't been a problem. Now, if you're gonna be shooting a lot of people, let's say you have a photo shoot where you gotta shoot, 20 people, probably this is a lens that you're gonna wanna bring only if you're gonna be using it on a tripod. Now, if you're gonna be moving around, running and gunning with this lens, your hand is gonna take a toll, so that is something to keep in mind. However, to myself, the times that I've used the studio, I've used it a lot at the studio and in the outdoors, and what I do is I set up a tripod, and when I want to take a break, I simply put the lens on the tripod and that's it. The 135mm is a lens that doesn't get used much in confined space. And now my studio is kind of like medium to large size, I have no problem, but when I'm on location and I gotta shoot, let's say at a store or something like that, probably this is not a lens that I'm actually gonna bring. So something like the 85 or the 105 is gonna suit me better than the 135. However, it is a lens that I use the most for the outdoors. The 1.8 and the 135 focal range is going to give you incredible background separation from your subject. Now, the bokeh rendition from this lens is outstanding, and the focusing performance, like I mentioned before, is incredible. So it's a lens that I can recommend for sport photography, even though I don't shoot sport photography, but because of its fast autofocus and because of the focal range, this is going to be great for those situations. All right, so we're back from shooting a couple of images with each lens, and what I'm gonna be showing you right now, guys, is the different artifacts that this lens produces. So we're gonna be looking for vignetting, we're gonna be looking for chromatic aberration, distortion. Also, we're gonna compare the amount of bokeh that every single lens renders. So let's start right here in Lightroom. All right, guys, so I'm right here right now with the first lens. This is the 85mm. The ISO has been set at 100, and I'm gonna start stopping down the aperture. So we're gonna start at f1.4. As you can see right now, there is some amount of vignetting. It's nothing so aggressive, but there is a little bit of vignetting on the edges. As we move up to the f2, the vignetting starts disappearing. At f2.8, it becomes much more acceptable. At f4, it's almost gone. f5.6 again, and between f4 and f5.6 we can notice a tiny difference right there in the corner, and as we go to f8 the vignetting is completely gone. So now with this sample you can also see the amount of bokeh that you're getting right here at f1.4, f2, 2.8, 4, 5.6 and 8. Now let's move on to the 105. Now the 105, again, I shot at f1.4. My ISO is still 100. And again, f1.4, we see a little bit of vignetting right here on the edges. As we move up to f2, the difference is actually drastic. So let's go back and forth. You can toggle right here and see how you have kind of like the hot spot in the center and a lot of vignetting all around the lens. So as we move up to f2.8, again, it becomes much more acceptable. f1.4 to f2.8, huge difference. Now as we continue to go down in the aperture, now we are f4. f4 is almost gone completely. At 5.6, again, we don't see anything. There's a little bit of difference here on the exposure. So far the 85mm f1.4 and the Sigma 105 f1.4 kind of like suffer of the same vignetting as you stop down the aperture. So let's continue with the 135 right now. So with the 135, the maximum aperture of this lens is f1.8. So you can see, of course, some vignetting all around the image at f1.8. As we move up to f2, becomes a lot better. f2.8 becomes kind of like the sweet spot at the widest aperture. Then we go f4, becomes almost imperceptible. f5.6 is gone completely. And of course, f8, there's not even a single hint of that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have on the left-hand side, we're gonna have the reference model picture compared to the other two lenses. All right, so on the left-hand side, we're gonna have the 85mm at f1.4, and on the right-hand side, we have the 105 at f1.4. Right off the bat, you can see that the 85mm at f1.4 has way more vignetting all around the image than the 105. Now, let's compare the 85 against the 135. And the 135, it's f1.8, so the image looks a little bit darker than the 85mm because of the 85mm is f1.4, but we can see that the amount of vignetting is almost equal on both lenses, 85 and 135. Now, the one that completely shines is, if you can see right now on the right-hand side, this is the 105. The 105 produces much cleaner image, but again, remember, the size of this lens is incredibly huge. Look at the size of the 105 and the size of the 85, and the 135 is almost the same diameter. So size does matter when it comes to lenses apparently, and especially this lens right here, the 105. This is the reason why this one renders a much cleaner image than 85mm and 135. Okay, on this example, we can see on the left-hand side, the 85mm at f8, and on the right-hand side, we have the 105 at f8. At a glance, you know, both lenses are rendering an incredible image. The 85mm seems to be a little bit brighter. Now, we're gonna put on the right-hand side the 135mm, and we kind of like find that same effect of the 85 looking just a tiny bit brighter. Now, the next test is going to be showing you barrel distortion. And again, 85 from 135, we're gonna see some sort of level of distortion. And of course, as you go higher in focal length, that distortion is less and less. So now I'm gonna enable profile correction. And as you can see, it's just a tiny bit of distortion that Lightroom is trying to compensate. It also lightens up a little bit of that vignetting that we talked about before. Now, in this example, I'm showing you the 105 at 5.6. And again, we're gonna enable profile correction. And as you can see, in this case, the correction is actually minimal when compared to the 85. Now, last but not least, this one is the 135mm f1.8, and we're gonna enable profile correction. And in this lens, yes, indeed, it's a little bit less. So it seems like the distortion on the 85, of course, because it's a little bit wider than the 105 and 135, is gonna be much more noticeable. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that on the 85, the correction at f5.6 is a lot more noticeable than on the other lenses, whereas on the 105, for example, it's actually imperceptible. And on the 135, the correction is also not so much. So, all right, so in this test, we're gonna be checking for bokeh rendition, chromatic aberration, and also we're gonna be testing depth of field. So the test is gonna consist of two images. The first image, I'm gonna be focusing on an object in the foreground. In this case, it's a flower. And then we're gonna do the opposite. We're gonna focus on the background, leaves, and the object in the foreground is gonna be blurred out. So that's gonna give us a sense of the depth of field. So let's jump into Lightroom. Okay, so in this test, we have the 85mm being shot at f1.4. And as you can see, the amount of bokeh is really, really creamy, really, really smooth. So now let's actually focus on the flower to see the amount of detail that this lens renders at f1.4. So the focus is somewhere in here. And as you can see, as we move down in this flower, we can start seeing the flower to get some of the details out of focus. Now we're gonna do exactly the same thing with the 105 at f1.4. And again, this one, the background seems to be much, much smoother. Let's toggle between the 85 and 105. And as you can see, you get much more of that creamier look of the background. So 105, 85. So we're gonna be zooming in this image, and as you can see, all the edges look super, super sharp. Of course, there are some of the details that go a little bit out of focus right there. and the quality of the image is really good. Last but not least is the 135. So the 135 again produces a very, very creamy bokeh background. And let's compare against the 105. And now let's compare it against the 85 millimeter. So 85 millimeter, 135 millimeter, 105. So on the left hand side, we have the 135 millimeter at f1.8, which is the maximum wide aperture of that lens. And on the right hand side, we have the 85 millimeter at f1.4. Let's compare the rendition of the flower close up. So as we can see, the 85 millimeter seems to have more of that chromatic aberration in areas of high contrast, like right here. But again, you know, this lens has a much wider aperture than the 135. Nonetheless, both lenses are pretty clean. Now in this test, we're gonna check for background compression and depth of field. So I'm gonna be focusing first on an image in the foreground, and then I'm gonna switch focus to the background. So let's do it. So this is the 85 millimeter f1.4. We're focusing on that flower. Now we're gonna switch to the background. And this is the amount of compression that you should expect from an 85 millimeter. So again, foreground, background. Now this one right here is the 105 Sigma, again shot at f1.4. Now we're gonna switch to the background, and this is the amount of compression that you should expect from a 105. Now, comparing both 85 and 105, there is a pretty noticeable difference right there. Now, we're gonna do exactly the same thing with a 135 millimeter. So we shot this flower, and the tripod has been placed at the same location. We haven't moved the tripod in any of this test. Now we're gonna switch to the background, and again, you know, the background seems to be much closer, and if we compare this with the 85 millimeter, you can see the huge difference in background compression right there. Okay, in this example, we can compare the 85 millimeter, which is the one on the left-hand side, versus the 105 that is on the right-hand side. And now we're gonna switch to the 135 on the right-hand side, and you can tell the amount of compression that all lenses render. So 85, 105, 135. Okay, so in this part of the test, we're actually gonna be focusing on chromatic aberration, and for that, we're actually gonna concentrate on those background images that I took, and we're gonna compare the chromatic aberrations rendered by all lenses at their widest aperture. So let's do it. And this is what you should expect at f1.4 with the 85 millimeter. This is its widest aperture. I think the focus was, if I'm not mistaken, right here. So we focus on this area, and as we actually go up, we can start seeing that chromatic aberration, like purple fringe, and really noticeable on the 85 millimeters. This time, this is the 105 at f1.4. As you can see, there is way less chromatic aberration on the 105. Now let's move on to this area where we found a lot of chromatic aberration on the 85 millimeter f1.4. And as you can see on the 105, the chromatic aberration is minimal. We see a little bit of chromatic aberration here, but nowhere near as the 85 millimeters. Now let's move out to the 135 millimeter. Again, I think I aim focus at this area right here. It looks pretty sharp and nice and clean. Little chromatic aberration in this part of the image as well. Now let's move up to the area where we found the problem with the 85 millimeter. And again, you know, as you can see, the chromatic aberration of the 135, it looks like it's the cleanest one when it comes to chromatic aberration. Now remember, if you follow my review of the 135, Sony claims that the new coating and the new optical design removes chromatic aberration, suppresses chromatic aberration. And in this test, I can guarantee you that that is exactly what is happening. So the 135 seems to be a little bit cleaner than even the 105, which the 105 has very little chromatic aberration, but definitely the 135 is the winner right here. All right, so as you guys have seen after this review, we got 3 lenses, and all these lenses are actually incredible. Now, the 85 showed to have the most disadvantage of all the lenses. The 85 millimeter f1.4 is the lens that actually renders more chromatic aberration. It's the lens that is a little bit softer towards the edges at f1.4. But of course, as you stop the lens down to the f4, f5.6, the lens becomes, all these lenses actually become somewhat equal. Now, the 105 f1.4, I think that is a bang for your buck. It's a lens that is actually the cheapest lens out of the three lenses, it sits at $1,500 versus $1,800 of the 85mm, and of course the 135 is $2,100. So the 105 to me is actually a good pick. It's a lens that it gives you a good focal range. You know, it sits in between the 85 and the 135. It's a lens that you can use actually at a studio, medium to large size studio. And it's a lens that's gonna make you happy. It's just a little bit heavy, but again, it's the cheapest lens, and the quality out of this lens is really immaculate. Now, moving up to the 135 f1.8, clearly that has been the lens with the least amount of chromatic aberration. It also shows to be the lens with the utmost sharpness all around the image across the edges. And again, it's a lens that is a little bit more expensive, but again, it has some of the latest technologies from Sony. A new optical design that is supposed to suppress chromatic aberration, and indeed we can see that right here. And the choice is yours, guys. So let me know, which lens do you own? Which lens are you planning to own? Drop your comments down below. As always, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button for more content like this one. Until then, take care.